Okay, we are now going to be switching gears completely. We've been working on Riemann sums for quite some time, finding the area underneath the curve. Well, calculus is basically summed up into 3 different topics: derivatives, integrals, and limits. Well, we've talked about limits. We did that earlier before the CLEP exam, and we've talked about Riemann sums. The other key piece of this is, of course, something we call slope. All right? Now, in saying that, what do we know is the slope equation? I'm talking about when you were back in 7th grade, how did you learn about slope? Maybe some of you might have been 8th grade, but you learned about slope. Slope was basically rise over the run, right? It was the change in y over the change in x. It was delta y over delta x. It was, whatever. However you learned it, it was, in fact, just, that's it, slope. Change in y, change in x. Well, we are now going to distinguish something called the slope of a secant line. Now, if you can remember back to Algebra 2 trig, a secant line was something that passed through, right? It passed through the circle. A tangent line barely touched it. It hit just on an instant or one little spot. The slope of a secant line is basically passing through 2 points. The average rate of change and the slope of a secant line are one and the same. And as far as you can tell, in fact, it is exactly the same as the slope that you learned back in 7th or 8th grade with the change in y over the change in x. So what does that mean to you? Nothing really, because you should be able to do this. It's just going to be worded in a different way. It's going to look more sophisticated, but the truth is it all means the same as you learned long ago. If I said to you to find the average rate of change, that means to you find the slope of this equation over an interval -2 to 3. If we were to graph this parabola, and it doesn't really matter how it falls other than we know that it opens up, I'm basically hitting it between 2 points, and I want you to find the slope of the line that's passing through those 2 points. So to look at it using function notation, what this would mean is I'm going to do f of 3 minus f of -2, and the denominator I would then do 3 minus a -2. Now when your middle school teachers taught you about this, they probably use things like y1, y2, and x1 and x2, or vice versa. And the idea here is that you keep the order. Notice I have f of 3 and then I have the x value that corresponds to that. So how do I find what f of 3 is? Right, we plug it in. So I would have 9 plus 15, which is 24, plus 1. So I'd have 25 minus. Now we got to put -2 in there. -2 squared would be 4 minus 10, and so that means -6. Plus 1 is a -5. Over 3 minus a -2, or +5. So that makes this 30 divided by 5. The answer to that is 6. As simple as that. So I want you basically, this whole video is intended to just reveal to you that the average rate of change is the same thing as the slope of a secant line, which is the same thing as the slope you learned back in the day. Now please make sure that I talk about tomorrow in class, numbers 36 to 38, because in particular I want you to notice the different ways of asking the same exact question.